There comes a moment, often subtle and unannounced, when the mask you've so carefully crafted begins to crack. Perhaps it's a quiet dissatisfaction, a hollow echo in the midst of routine success, or a deep, unnameable fatigue that no amount of distraction can dissolve. This is not merely weariness. It is the soul's rebellion against the false self. From childhood, you were taught what was acceptable. You learned to smile when unhappy, to agree when you disagreed, to nod even when your soul was screaming no. You became what others needed you to be: responsible, agreeable, pleasing, strong, silent, humble, charming, invulnerable. You wore these traits like armor, like camouflage, and for a time it worked. You were accepted, even admired. You fit the mold, passed the tests, received the applause, but inside you were slowly being erased. This armor, this persona, is not entirely evil. It was once your protector. It shielded you from judgment, from exile, from the raw chaos of not belonging. But it is not who you are. It is who you became in order to survive, and survival has a cost. The price is your truth. To live behind the mask for too long is to forget there was ever a face beneath it. And yet that face, your essence, never truly vanishes. It waits, buried in dreams, in the body's symptoms, in the quiet despair that surfaces at night. It whispers in moments of solitude. It screams through your dissatisfaction. It watches every compromise you make in the name of peace, every betrayal of your authentic voice, and it waits for the breaking point. And when that point comes, it does not come gently. The collapse of the false persona is a violent unraveling. What you thought was you begins to disintegrate. Beliefs that once gave you certainty now feel hollow. Roles you once played with ease begin to feel suffocating. People you once called friends now seem like strangers. Even your own reflection starts to feel unfamiliar. At first, you may resist. You may cling harder to what's falling apart, trying desperately to reassemble the image, to glue the fragments of the mask back together. But the glue no longer holds. The soul has begun its ascent, and it will not be silenced. You will feel lost, adrift in a strange and unfriendly sea. The identity you wore like a second skin has peeled away, and beneath it is rawness, vulnerability, a terrifying openness. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you are becoming. This space, this liminal place between death and rebirth, is sacred. It is in this abyss that you confront what you have hidden. Not only your deepest wounds, but your deepest potential. Here, the ego cowers while the true self stirs. And in this stirring, something ancient awakens, something instinctive, unshaped by culture, untouched by conditioning. A presence that has watched you through every mask, waiting, always waiting for you to come home to it. But this homecoming has a cost. When the mask falls away, what lies beneath is not light, but shadow. It is a common illusion, especially among those who seek enlightenment, that to live your truth is to walk into radiance, into clarity, into peace. But the first figures to greet you on the path of authenticity are not angels. They are the forgotten, exiled parts of yourself, the parts you learned to deny in order to be loved. The shadow is not evil. It is simply unseen. It is composed of everything the conscious self has refused to claim. Your rage, your envy, your lust, your cowardice, your ambition, your brilliance, your strange desires, your unspoken truths. These are not foreign invaders. They are fragments of you that were cast out to maintain the image of who you were supposed to be. But no part of the psyche disappears. What is denied does not die, it waits. And when you begin to live your truth, the inner equilibrium changes. What was buried begins to rise. The shadow steps out from the unconscious and presents itself with alarming force, not because it seeks to destroy you, but because it demands to be seen, heard, and integrated. It begins subtly, a sudden burst of anger in a moment that doesn't justify it, an irrational jealousy that catches you off guard, a sharp, condemning voice in your mind you didn't know was yours. Dreams become strange and confrontational. Your body becomes restless. Your emotions no longer play by the old rules. What's happening is not madness. It is memory. The body, the psyche, the soul. They are remembering what you forgot. They are retrieving the parts you sacrificed on the altar of approval. And now those parts return, but they do not return politely. They arrive with the fury of abandonment. They demand attention, recognition, and most of all, ownership. You begin to see your own capacity for cruelty, manipulation, superiority. You see the masks you wore not as garments, but as cages. You see the ways in which you blamed others to avoid accountability. You see how often your kindness was performative, your humility rooted in fear, your strength a disguise for shame. This confrontation can break you, and it must, because until the shadow is faced, you are a divided being, half in light, half in darkness, half honest, half enslaved. You may claim to be free, but if you have not wrestled with the aspects of yourself you fear most, your truth is still partial, still performative. The emergence of the shadow is sacred violence. It is a sacred war, not against the world, but within your own soul. And in that war, you must be willing to face the monsters that bear your name. You must be willing to stop calling your pain someone else's fault. You must learn to hold the mirror steady as the parts you hate come home. And here, a strange paradox begins to take shape. The more you allow the shadow to speak, the less control it has over you. The more you meet it with curiosity instead of condemnation, the more it reveals not just your darkness, but your power. Hidden within the shadow are instincts, talents, and truths you were too afraid to claim. Your rage, when purified, becomes passion. Your envy, when understood, becomes aspiration. Your fear, when embraced, becomes a doorway to courage. Your grief, when honored, becomes a reservoir of empathy. And still, the journey into the shadow has no map, no linear path, no destination you can see. It is a spiral descent into the soul's depths, where each layer stripped away reveals another underneath. And each truth uncovered brings both pain and liberation. You lose the comfort of ignorance, but you gain the clarity of self-knowledge, and yet this knowledge isolates you. Once the mask is shattered and the shadow steps forward, a peculiar silence begins to form around you. Not the peace of solitude, but the estrangement of awakening. You begin to see clearly, and that clarity distances you. There is a stage in living your truth that cannot be bypassed, the valley of isolation. It is here that many turn back, because something strange happens when you no longer play the role others expect. They no longer recognize you, and in truth, they never knew you. They only knew the version of you that made them comfortable. The agreeable self, the loyal self, the self that never said too much, never demanded too much, never changed the terms of the unspoken agreement. Now that self is gone, and what remains unsettles them. You find yourself surrounded by the familiar, but feeling foreign. You sit in rooms you once enjoyed and feel a strange hollowness. You speak, and your words feel heavier, or too honest, or too sharp. You begin to realize how many of your past conversations were rituals of avoidance, designed to maintain harmony at the cost of authenticity. As you awaken, others may pull away, or worse, they may try to pull you back. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Your transformation exposes their stagnation. Your truth calls out the falsehood in the room. And for those who are not yet ready to face their own shadow, your presence becomes a mirror they refuse to look into. And so the invitations stop, the silence grows, the phone doesn't ring, People you once called friends begin to vanish, not in rage, but in quiet discomfort. Some will label your truth as arrogance. Others will call your distance coldness. Some will even accuse you of being ungrateful, of changing too much, of not being the same person anymore. They're right, you're not. You've begun to shed the borrowed skins, and that shedding, though vital, is deeply lonely. You walk now through the wilderness of authenticity, and in this space there are no guidebooks, no crowds, no applause. There is only the sound of your own thoughts, the weight of your own choices, and the relentless questioning, am I doing the right thing? Have I lost everything just to be myself? Will anyone understand me now? These questions don't come from weakness. They come from the grieving self, because to live your truth is to die many times. You die to your former identity. You die to old expectations. You die to relationships that cannot meet you in your wholeness. And death, even in its symbolic form, isolates. Yet isolation is not punishment. It is preparation. It is in this space, where no one else's voice drowns your own, that you begin to truly hear yourself. The silence that felt like abandonment begins to feel like sanctuary. The solitude that once felt like exile begins to feel like freedom. You discover that what you feared most, being alone, is the very soil in which your soul begins to speak clearly. But this clarity does not arrive all at once. At first you mourn, then you rage, then you surrender, and finally something new begins to form. A stillness, a steadiness, a presence. You stop reaching outward. You begin rooting inward. You realize that true belonging was never about being accepted by the crowd. It was about accepting the totality of yourself. And yet, as this inner alignment strengthens, you also begin to see something else. The world you once belonged to no longer feels like home. There comes a quiet moment in the long, lonely passage through the wilderness of authenticity when you begin to notice something strange. The questions that once tormented you begin to soften. The doubt still lingers, but its grip is weaker. The fear still whispers, but it no longer commands. The ache of isolation remains, but beneath it, something new begins to stir. A voice, fragile yet unmistakable. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It simply knows. This is the rebirth of inner authority. For most of your life, you were taught to outsource your truth. You were trained, by culture, family, tradition, to look outward for answers. You learned to trust experts, leaders, doctrines, and popular opinion more than your own experience. You measured your worth by metrics you didn't create. You doubted your instincts. You silenced your gut feelings. You guessed your wisdom, because it didn't match the script. And now, as the old scaffolding of the self crumbles, and the external voices fade into the background, what emerges from the rubble is not chaos, but clarity. You begin to realize no one else knows. Not really, no one knows why you were born, no one knows what you're here to do, no one knows the shape your soul came to take, no one knows what you carry, what you've endured, what still lives in the unspoken corners of your heart. So you stop asking for permission to be real. This is not rebellion, this is resurrection. The self that once looked to the world for validation now looks inward for alignment. You stop moving toward what is acceptable and begin moving toward what is true. And truth, you realize, is not a doctrine to memorize. It is a resonance you feel in your bones. You begin to live by the subtle compass of inner knowing. You don't always understand it, but you trust it. You sense when something is wrong before you can explain why. You sense when something is right before you can justify it. You begin to honor the deep intelligence that exists below thought, what some might call intuition or soul or the voice of the divine within. And in this trust you reclaim your power. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop sacrificing your peace to fit into spaces that demand your silence. You speak differently now, not to impress, not to dominate, not to be liked, but to reveal what is real. Your yes becomes sacred. Your no becomes complete. This inner authority does not seek to control others. It seeks only to remain loyal to itself. It is not loud or boastful. It does not parade itself in certainty. It allows for mystery, contradiction, nuance. It knows that truth evolves, that the soul is not a fixed point but a living process, and so it listens deeply, it chooses wisely, it acts slowly, and it lives freely. You begin to feel less afraid of being misunderstood. You begin to accept that your life may not make sense to others. You release the need to explain your every step. You know now that clarity is not a product of approval. It is the reward of alignment. And slowly the chains fall away, the chains of should, the chains of obligation, the chains of inherited guilt, the chains of false humility. One by one, they break as the truth of who you are begins to lead. Not the self others see, but the one that sees through you. And yet, this awakening is not without consequence. When the soul begins to lead, something curious begins to happen. Reality responds, not in grand, theatrical displays, but in whispers. In patterns, in symbols, in moments so precise they seem impossible to dismiss. This is not coincidence. This is synchronicity, the mysterious intersection where inner transformation meets outer alignment. And it begins only after inner authority is reclaimed, as you live more truthfully, saying what is real, doing what feels right, letting go of what no longer resonates. You begin to notice a shift in the very fabric of your life. It's subtle at first. A book lands in your lap that speaks directly to the question you've been wrestling with for weeks. A stranger says the exact words your heart needed to hear. You have a dream, and days later, something from that dream happens. A long, lost opportunity resurfaces at the precise moment you're ready to receive it. These are not accidents, they are messages. For so long you were taught to ignore this language. Logic was your compass. Probability was your law. Anything that could not be measured, predicted, or proven was dismissed as fantasy. But now, as you live in deeper honesty with yourself, something ancient within you reawakens, the ability to see not with the eyes, but with the soul. You begin to remember that reality is not a dead machine, but a living mirror. And this mirror reflects not your desires or your fears, but your frequency, your inner state. The more aligned you are with your true nature, the more the world around you begins to organize itself in response. Not always with ease, not always with comfort, but always with precision. Synchronicity reveals the soul's dialogue with the universe. It is the cosmos leaning in to say, I see you, keep going, and so the ordinary becomes sacred. Time is no longer linear. It becomes layered, symbolic, intimate. You walk into a room and feel as though you've entered a memory. A song plays on the radio and echoes a thought you had just moments before. Numbers repeat themselves on clocks, on receipts, on license plate, reminding you that something is guiding this moment, not controlling it but collaborating with it. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start wondering, what is this trying to show me? This is not about magical thinking. This is about becoming conscious of the hidden architecture of reality. You are not being rewarded for good behavior. You are being mirrored. The veil between inner and outer begins to thin. Life becomes layered with meaning. You find yourself standing in moments that feel orchestrated, not because they are convenient, but because they are true. In the presence of synchronicity, doubt softens. You begin to trust the unseen currents guiding your path. You realize that the soul is not navigating alone. There are forces, intelligences, beyond the grasp of the rational mind that begin to collaborate with the authentic self. You no longer need to control everything. You learn to participate. The world becomes alive again. And yet, with this unveiling comes a profound responsibility to interpret wisely, to listen deeply, to respond with integrity. Not every sign is a solution. Not every symbol is comfort. Sometimes synchronicity leads you not to safety, but to challenge. It opens doors not to escape, but to transformation. It asks of you not to believe, but to be fully, attentively, courageously. Because once you begin to see the world as alive, it never stops speaking. To live your truth is not liberation without weight. It is freedom with consequence. There comes a time in the journey when you realize that truth does not only demand expression, it demands ownership. And this ownership is not abstract. It is not poetic. It is radical responsibility, the kind that confronts you in the quietest hours and refuses to let you turn away, the kind that does not flatter the ego, but dismantles it. The world you once moved through passively now calls for participation. No longer asleep in the collective trance, you can no longer claim blindness. You can no longer pretend you do not know, because once you see, once you truly see, you are accountable to what you know. And this is both burden and gift. You realize that every word you speak has power, not just potential. Every action you take shapes the psychic field around you. Every avoidance, every projection, every unconscious gesture ripples outward. You are no longer just one person making choices. You are a force, a pattern, a frequency affecting the whole. And this realization can be crushing. At first, it paralyzes. You hesitate. You question yourself. You become hyper-aware of your faults, your contradictions, your failures. You see all the ways you've wounded others, betrayed yourself, deferred responsibility in the name of survival. You see the harm in your silence, the cost of your inaction, the betrayal in your pretending. There is grief in this reckoning, because responsibility is not simply about what you do. It is about what you carry. And to carry your life with integrity, you must first face all the versions of you that could not. You must meet the parts of you that were irresponsible, immature, fragmented, dependent. You must feel the weight they placed on others and on your own soul. But this burden is sacred. It is the weight that refines the soul. It is the pressure that crystallizes truth into wisdom, and as you bear it, not with shame but with humility, you begin to feel something else emerge, something strong, something clear, something rooted. This is the gift. The more you claim your life as your own, every failure, every decision, every shadow, every triumph, the more inner solidity you cultivate. You become trustworthy to yourself. You stop outsourcing your sovereignty to blame, to victimhood, to fate. You begin to see that while not everything is your fault, everything is your opportunity. And with that opportunity comes choice. Not the surface-level choice between options handed to you by society, but the deeper, more unsettling kind. The choice to lead your life as a conscious being rather than a conditioned one. The choice to stop waiting for permission. The choice to stop hiding behind wounds. The choice to stop performing survival and begin embodying truth. This is not a comfortable path. It does not promise ease. It requires vigilance, courage, and continual self-confrontation. It calls for discipline, not as repression, but as devotion. Devotion to what is real. Devotion to something within you that is worth trusting, even when it disrupts the comfort of those around you. Responsibility transforms from burden into privilege the moment you realize that what you do with your life matters, not in a grandiose, performative sense, but in the intimate, precise way that your presence affects the unseen layers of reality. Every conversation becomes an echo, every silence becomes a decision, every intention becomes a seed. Every reaction becomes a teacher. You are no longer merely reacting to life, you are responding to it. Consciously, deliberately, willingly, and yet, with this awakening, something even deeper begins to stir. A question, not spoken in words, but felt in the marrow. If I carry this much power, what now must I serve?